Hi, my name is Dylan Clemens, and I'm here to talk to you about the vinyl revival. In the world of music, there are dozens of ways to listen to your favorite artist, whether it be physical or digital. But aside from digital, there's really only one format that's managed to stay as prevalent in the last century as most of the others, and that's vinyl. And none of them have managed to survive, kind of like vinyl has, but vinyl didn't always survive. It also did die out at one point. But they're never going to be able to come back like vinyl has either. And you might be thinking, but what's the history behind vinyl? Why did it nearly go extinct? What is the vinyl revival? Why is the vinyl revival important? And the vinyl revival is just a show of how alive vinyl is today in the younger generation. But to know that, you've got to take a look at its history. And while not everyone knows what the history of vinyl is, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who's never heard of a vinyl. And what vinyl does isn't hard to figure out. It's fairly obvious. But what the comeback means and what the comeback is a different story. And its decent sized comeback in recent years implies that there's a chance for other formats to come back. I mean, it's unlikely, but there's a chance. And it also implies that this is just another way for the newer generation to express themselves. Um, Vinyl's been around for a while. It's got a very timeless history, and it's just always had an influence on a all the young generations. Well, when some of the previous generations were young, um, they've always had a place in society, whether it's most popular music format or just a way for an underground artist to release some new music to his fans in a more personal kind of way. But they've also managed to come back, unlike CDs and cassettes have. And CDs and cassettes aren't coming back anytime soon. But the comeback of vinyl was a bit of a surprise. In fact, as Felix Richter states in one of his statistic reports, 17% of album sales last year were vinyl. And that's high considering that almost 20 years ago, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, vinyl was on the verge of extinction, and it was a very underground thing. And the history behind vinyl is actually fairly interesting as well. It started off in the 30s as a successor to Edison's crappy little gramophone wax tube disc. Or, not disc, but tube. And it was a big improvement, but there was a lot of stuff going on with it, specifically the speed wars, because every company wanted people to buy their records, and so they'd have them at different speeds, and depending on what brand of turntable you had, that was the brand of record you'd have to buy. And as time went on, they settled on 33 RPM, and everything's like that now. But as time went by, there were sound advancements like the switch from mono to stereo in the 1960s, and the switch from thicker material to Dynaflex in the 1970s. And then in the 80s, that's when stuff kind of started to die out. In fact, as Becky Roberts states in her small online article about the vinyl, well, not the vinyl revival, but just vinyl, the history of vinyl, she states that with the popularity of cassettes and followed by CDs in the 1980s, vinyl just became a thing of the past. And she's very much right. Vinyl was really starting to die out in the 80s. Cassettes were portable and cheap and just inexpensive, and CDs, well, while being kind of expensive, they were also portable. You can't just lug a turntable around and pop on a record anytime you want. It was always an at-home thing. You didn't have to wait till you were at home to listen to music. You could finally do it on the go. And now today with the vinyl revival, which is fueled mostly by teens today. In fact, to them it's retro and vintage, and it kind of matches their little aesthetic, and that's something that fuels it because to them it's a way of being unique and self-expressed, and it's also like a hobby and a conversation piece for them, and it gives them something to talk about or just something to do in their spare time. And that's kind of what's been pushing it along. It's also a way for artists to, like famous artists, to re-release their stuff to younger generations, and underground artists to release stuff to their fan bases in a more personal sense, because most people just feel that vinyl has a more personal feel to it. Now, you might be thinking, okay, what's the vinyl revival and what does it mean? Well, the vinyl revival, in a literal sense, is just an influx in vinyl sales compared to 20 years ago when they were absolutely nothing. And, ooh, excuse me. It's just, there's another term though, and there's kind of like a hidden meaning. To the younger generation, to them it means a form of self-expression, a form of feeling unique, a form of just supporting local artists and making, or feeling like you make a difference. And for instance, Taylor Wallace said in an interview with KUTX, I like owning the album, especially when it's a local artist, because that's money in their pocket, and I like shopping. It gives me another reason to go out. And in a sense, that sums up the vinyl revival itself. For today's generation, it's a form of self-expression, showing people your music taste, showing people how unique you are, or and sometimes even just finding new music, or uh, supporting local bands and feeling like you make a difference, or just simply having something to call your own. Because there's a difference between digital streaming and just physically owning your music. Digital streaming, at the end of the day, it doesn't really feel like it's yours. But when you own a vinyl, you know that's yours, and it's kind of like a sense of ownership. And in terms of the literal sense, again, with the whole vinyl revival, it's just an influx of vinyl sales in recent times. In fact, it's being fueled by the younger generation. Those are the people who are going out and buying vinyls now. And in fact, according to Helena Asprow in one of her articles, she states, according to a YouGov survey, out of 1,444 people, 1 in 4 18 to 24-year-olds have bought a record in the last month. And it goes to show that that's the younger generation pushing this along. Most people think, oh, well, it's just boomers trying to rehash old memories. And in reality, it's a younger generation just trying to find themselves and feel unique and support local artists at the same time. And I would say knowing this is beneficial, because once you get into collecting vinyl, knowing all this stuff, it makes it feel a lot more special. And I think this whole vinyl revival, and it implies that there's a chance for other things to come back as well, maybe in the form of a trend or for good. It also implies that this is just another way for a younger generation to express themselves, find themselves, and just feel unique. Um, in fact, a record shop owner, Eric Milan, exclaims, now it's a very personal thing for the younger generation, as he brushes over how they're the first in their family to do this. Before them, nobody owned a turntable, nobody owned records. They're the first generation in their family to buy stuff like that, and it's something they can truly call their own, and that's what makes it special for them. So, like I said, knowing the importance of the vinyl revival really just depends on knowing the history behind vinyl and just knowing what makes it special to today's generation. And there's a lot behind the vinyl revival, from the history of vinyl to from it going nearly extinct to coming back from the dead. And also, it owes itself to today's generation for bringing it back. Because it was on the verge of extinction. It was very low. CDs had overpowered it by a lot, and it's also just a way for, I guess, today's generation to just express themselves and feel unique and feel like they're making a difference and just have something they can truly call their own. And I think that's what makes the vinyl, it's what makes the vinyl revival so special for today's generation and just in general. And that's about it.